An urgent plea for help as the death toll continues to rise in Sierra Leone following devastating mudslides. Teen girls gather in Malawi to advance their science and tech skills. And how a Nigerian company hopes to crack the local egg market. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent McCory. This is Africa 54. Now tonight we begin in West Africa, where residents of Sierra Leone's capital are reeling with grief from losing loved ones in a devastating mudslide and heavy flooding. Rescuers pressed ahead Wednesday with their search for hundreds of people still missing in and around Freetown. Now, rescue workers have uncovered nearly 400 bodies in the region area in the outskirts of Freetown. That's according to Chief Coroner Sene Dumbuya. He says he expects that that number to surpass 500 as the search continues. At least 3,000 people have been left homeless and urgently need food, shelter and health care, while another 600 are missing. Now, Nigeria continues to struggle defending itself against terrorist attacks. Suicide bombers attacked a camp for internally displaced people and a nearby market in a northeastern Nigerian village on Tuesday, killing at least 20 people, that's according to a local official. The village chief, Lawan Kali, says at least 3 suicide bombers entered a Mandaro Rees market at the 5 p.m. local time, posing as buyers. Then an undetermined number went to the nearby camp for people displaced by Nigeria's conflict, while at least 1 militant stayed at the market. Then, according to Lali, they all detonated the explosives almost at the same time. The chief says at least 80 people were wounded and were rushed to the hospital in Maiduguri, about 30 kilometers away. Now, across the continent in Somalia, the former second-in-command of Al-Shabaab is now claiming to be working with the Somali government to forge peace after quitting the Somali-based terrorist group. Mokhtar Rabo, also known as Abu Mansour, made the announcement Tuesday to journalists at a Mogadishu hotel. Rabo said he left the group more than 5 years ago over differences with other Al-Shabaab leaders and conflicts over the group's ideology.
For that period of 5 years and 7 months, I lived in the jungle of Bako region, where I was attacked and the group attempted to kill me. But Allah saved me, and I fought back and defended myself.
Well, the former Al-Shabaab official indicated he is holding talks with the Somali government and said, and I quote here, "I'm hopeful we can pave the way for lasting peace." Well, in neighboring Kenya, a statement by opposition leader Raila Odinga, who rejected his defeat in the bitter presidential contest, claiming the elections were rigged, was released on Wednesday. It came nearly a week after the Electoral Commission declared incumbent Uhuru Kenyatta the election winner, with 54% of the vote to Odinga's 44.8%. Odinga refuses to admit the tally is valid, asserting that the voting system was hacked. He is now pursuing his case through the court system.
Our decision to go to court constitutes a second chance for the Supreme Court. The court can use this chance to redeem itself, or like in 2013, it can compound the problems we face as a country. We will show how they shamelessly cooked the results from the non-existent polling stations and fake and gazetted presiding and returning officers. They have figures from non-existent forms 34As and 34Bs. They scrambled to manufacture such forms, switched vote numbers, and how they openly swindled to reach to determine consistent vote numbers. They cooked numbers to the extent that vote tallies often surpassed registered voters in polling stations.
Well, the White House released a statement on Tuesday congratulating Uhuru Kenyatta on his re-election and said it welcomed the statement by international and domestic observer missions, affirming the credibility of the election. Well, the whereabouts of Zimbabwean First Lady Grace Mugabe remains unknown as South African police and her lawyers negotiate the terms for a return, to turn herself in to face charges of assaulting a young woman at a luxury Johannesburg hotel. Now, Mrs. Mugabe is said to have returned to Zimbabwe on Tuesday, 2 days after the alleged assault. The wife of President Robert Mugabe is accused of beating a 20-year-old professional model on Sunday with an extension cord as she visited Mugabe's sons in a hotel. Photos posted on social media show the woman with a bloody gash on her forehead. It was not immediately clear what precipitated the alleged assault. Well, now to the United States, where for the second straight day, protesters ramped up their outrage outside President Donald Trump's New York home over his revolving response to the deadly racial violence in Charlottesville, Virginia.
Hundreds of people lined the streets outside Trump Tower, each with their own message for the president.
The fact that he took back his statement, when obviously it's very, very clear that what happened in Charlottesville was an egregious act by white supremacists and racism. It's a shame to have an American president who's unwilling to address a blunt racist attack by white supremacy. Yeah.
Trump's latest claim is that white supremacist followers and those who dislike them both hold some responsibility for violence on Saturday.
You look at both sides. I think there's blame on both sides, and I have no doubt about it, and you don't have any doubt about it either. And if you reported it accurately, you would say.
The president's comment was too much for one protester to take.
I was at home, I was working for most of the day, and I watched the press conference and said, get your shoes on, we're leaving, and we came down. We usually have our flag hanging on our wall, and you know what, they can have the Confederate flag, they can have the Nazi flag, they can have the Russian flag for all I care. This one's mine.
But among the sea of anti-Trump demonstrators was a glimmer of support for the president.
He's completely anti-Nazi, he's pro-Israel, pro-American.
A woman opposing white supremacy was struck and killed by a car driven by a neo-Nazi sympathizer. Several others were injured in the attack. Trump called the driver who allegedly killed 32-year-old Heather Heyer with his car a murderer, a disgrace to himself and to the country. He said Heyer was a fantastic, fine, incredible young woman. He also said job creation is one solution to overcome racism, saying people want great jobs with good pay. Esther Githu-Ewart, VOA News, Washington.
Well, a memorial service is underway in Charlottesville on Wednesday for the woman killed last weekend when a man drove his car through a crowd of people counter-protesting a white supremacist rally in the city. 32-year-old Heather Heyer, a resident of Charlottesville, was one of hundreds of activists who stood against a demonstration by white supremacists. VOA's Robert Raphael has more on the raising public discourse about America's present and, perhaps more importantly, its past.
Makeshift memorials now line a Charlottesville street where one woman was killed and 19 were injured during a white supremacist rally. Flowers and signs pay tribute to Heather Heyer, the 32-year-old paralegal struck down by a speeding car during Saturday's protest. One such banner was placed at the very statue that triggered the rally, a likeness of U.S. Civil War General Robert E. Lee. Lee led Confederate troops in the conflict during the mid-1800s, sparked in large part by Southerners insisting on the right to own slaves. The white supremacists who came to Charlottesville opposed plans to remove the statue. While some say they serve a purpose, other Americans argue such monuments glorify the worst part of the nation's history.
We have to take all of these things down, flags, statues, any type of memorial that really uplifts segregation or opposition. We need to get rid of it and have something that comes together and shows unity amongst the people.
This is tragic. It should never have come to this. No one should have ever died. They shouldn't be destroyed. They should be milestones, markers that show where we have been, and to understand for us to contemplate and reflect on our past, that we do not lose sight of our humanity.
One man came to Charlottesville from Turkey 10 years ago and owns a Turkish restaurant in the city. He says he won't be deterred by intolerance.
Because I really feel unsafe right now as a person who came from different country, and but I don't want to believe it, because I really believe these people whoever lives in this town, they're really nice, and they're not going to let these people win.
Some groups have started online petitions to have Charlottesville replace the Lee statue with a tribute to Heather Heyer. Robert Raffel, VOA News.
Well, I want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we covered. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our show live on Facebook, so check us out and share our show with your friends also. And check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Find me on Twitter at VOA Vince McCory. Coming up, Science for Girls advances in Africa. Stay with us.
This is BizBeat.
Throughout Italy, you'll find castles, monasteries, and villas dating back to the 11th century, but there's hundreds of them decayed over time and because of neglect. Now, an initiative by the Italian State Property Agency, backed by the Ministry of Tourism, is giving away these properties to qualified applicants who will restore these treasures to boost slow tourism favored by trekkers, pilgrims, and bike lovers. Roberto Reggi is the director of the Italian State Property Agency. He says overall it's more than 300 properties. In 2017, we've already received 210,000 applications for the first 100. It's an extraordinary success. Owners are required to show restoration plans with some kind of facility, for example, a restaurant, maybe a museum, or a clinic. Depending on the project plan and kind of agreement, owners would get property rights from 6 to 50 years. For VOA's BizBeat, I'm Philip Alexio.
I'm Jeff Selden, and I work the National Security Beat. National Security Beat is anything that affects the national security of the United States, from counterterrorism to surveillance to even relations with Russia. It's one of the most fascinating beats you can have. It's probably one of the more important beats that you can cover because it touches on so many areas of the world, so many areas of people's day-to-day lives. I'm Jeff Selden, and my beat is national security.
Well, in Wednesday's business report, violence erupted after the re-election of Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta. As with previous votes in 2007 and 2013, this year's elections have exposed underlying ethnic tensions. But will political turmoil spill over to the economy? Joining us from New York is Africa 54 business correspondent Jill Malandrina. Hello, Jill.
Hi, Vincent. As the largest economy in East Africa, Kenya is a crucial trade route to the continent and provides an important buffer of stability in a region that includes the fledgling Somali government and the politically tense Sudan and South Sudan. At the height of the 2007-2008 post-election violence, importers in Kenya and within the region incurred massive losses after their cargo was either delayed or stolen along the Northern Corridor route. Uganda, Rwanda, the DRC, and South Sudan were starved of supplies, with parts of the Northern Corridor cut off and the railway line had been vandalized.
So, from what you've seen, has there been any supply disruption following last week's election run?
Activity at the Mombasa port slowed last week as transporters pulled their fleets off the road over post-election uncertainties, and fears of unrest heightened as NASA presidential candidate Raila Odinga disputed the tallying of the vote. Clearing firms for shipping containers reported little or no activity for most of the election week. Uganda, which commands over 70% of transit goods, was said to have diverted business to the port of Dar es Salaam for the election period. Minimal activity was reported at the usually busy Northern Corridor highway. That said, activity started to pick up going into last weekend, which is encouraging, and Kenyans ignored calls by Odinga to boycott work on Monday as many businesses resumed countrywide.
And is it really, perhaps too early, too soon to tally the economic impact of all this?
Well, data obtained from the Kenya Ports Authority showed that the Mombasa port handled 15 million tons of cargo between January and June this year. That was a 12% increase over the 13.4 million tons cleared in the same period last year. This type of momentum and growth shows just how important Mombasa is for trade in the region. William Onjonyo, chairman of the Kenya International Freight and Warehousing Association, said that the week-long limbo has led to huge losses in their sector because of non-movement of of cargo from the port. Anjanio points out that goods and cargo are attracting additional costs in the name of extra storage because of the slow movement of cargo and reduced activity affects revenue collected by the KRA. I have not seen an official estimate of the total economic impact, but in 2016, the Parliament Budget Office cited the elections as the biggest concern for 2017 since projects and investments have been put on hold due to negative impact elections have had in Kenya's past. So hopefully with the election overhang removed, investment activity can resume.
We'll hope the same. Jill, thank you very much. That's
Thank you.
Africa 54's business correspondent Jill Malandrino reporting for us live from New York. Now, 100 teenage girls from 7 countries, that's Rwanda, Uganda, Liberia, Tanzania, Zambia, Malawi, and the U.S., recently gathered in Malawi for a Women in Science camp. Lamik Masina has more from the Malawi University of Science and Technology in southern Malawi.
Experts from the Intel Corporation and Google teach the girls to develop mobile phone apps. It's one of several lessons offered at this 2-week camp. The hope is that these teens will go on to pursue studies and careers in science, technology, engineering, arts and maths, also known as STEM fields.
We want every girl that participates in this camp to walk away with the knowledge and the confidence that if they want to develop computer applications, then they absolutely can. And we're giving them the building blocks and access to start doing that.
The camp was made possible by the UN Scale Up campaign, the US-based Intel Corporation, and the US Department of State.
Those fields everywhere, in my country, the United States, here in Malawi, and in many countries around the world, those fields tend to be dominated by men. It's time for that to change.
Role models were invited to share their experiences with the campers. The guests included former American NASA astronaut Leland Mevin and Malawi's only 2 female pilots, Captain Yolanda Kaunda and First Officer Lusekelo Mwenefumbo.
I was undermined as a girl, that I probably couldn't do the job, or I couldn't do it as good as a man. But the training is the same for a man and a woman. I mean, that's why we're called pilots, not pilotesses.
And those guys are really like inspiring people. And I learned that all of them, what they're like doing very important things. And they're in like male-dominated fields, and that they actually made it possible.
What I learned is like, even if I want to be like in the STEM field, so I need to work hard for it, and I will achieve it even if I'm a girl.
Organizers say more is expected from the girls after the camp.
These girls are going to go home and change their communities. They're going to bring this knowledge back to their schools. They're going to start Girl Up clubs, and they're going to be the leaders in science, technology, engineering, arts, and math.
STEM camps have also been held in Rwanda and Peru since 2015. In all, about 300 teenage girls have participated. Lamek Masina for VOA News, Cholo, Malawi.
Well, it's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54. A Nigerian company finds a colorful way to encourage egg consumption. We'll be right back.
Qu'on a mis à l'abri ici, actuellement sera avisé.
راهو كي تحطي براسلي واحد ميت وفي الساك موتيير
Welcome back to Africa 54, and here's what's trending. A Nigerian company eager to increase the consumption of eggs in the West African country has introduced colored hard-boiled eggs into the market. Fortuna Food and Bottling Company launched in May 2017 and is hoping to get every Nigerian to consume 300 eggs annually. Now, Nigerians currently consume about 80 eggs per person each year. Now, the eggs are first cleaned up, then placed on a machine to cook, after which they are sprayed with food color. The hard-boiled eggs are said to remain fresh for up to 5 weeks after processing. Well, next up, some people just really love cats. Thousands of cat enthusiasts were on hand for the 3rd annual Cat Corn Convention in Pasadena, California, for celebration of all things feline. Celebrity feline Nala Cat, who has 3.4 million followers on Instagram, met with some of her fans. Her owner, known only as Spooky, says Nala's popularity was down to her cartoon-like appearance. For attendees looking for a furry friend, the Pasadena Humane Society had dozens of cats and kittens on hand for adoption. Well, and finally, virtual reality experiences are being used by established tourist attractions in a bid to lure in more visitors. Now, the Shard in London, Western Europe's tallest building, has unveiled 2 new hair-raising virtual reality experiences, which are not for the faint-hearted. Strapped to a moving platform, thrill seekers take in 360 degrees views of London and the skyscraper, while virtually descending from heights of around 244 meters. Now, the viewing platforms are the new VR experience named Vertigo sees the building virtually fall away, leaving brave visitors suspended in air, walking across the skyscraper's early infrastructure. And that is what is trending. Now, Kenya's animated movie industry is in its infancy. Inspired by Hollywood, a few animators are determined, that is despite limited resources, to produce world-class movies that not only entertain, but also address social, political, and political issues in Kenya and beyond. One such animator is Gatumi. Gatumi is the CEO of Recount Digital, a Nairobi-based animation studio. I caught up with him on my recent trip to Kenya.
For as long as I can remember, I've enjoyed animation. And I know growing up, any opportunity to watch animation, I'd take it. And for a long time, since we didn't have a VCR at home, I looked forward to visiting our cousins who did have one, and we'd watch various Disney films there. And we're very glad when finally the local broadcaster started broadcasting animation in the afternoons, and I would relish that time watching a few shows. Throughout my life, I've enjoyed animation, especially work from great studios like Disney, Warner Brothers, etc., and some of the Japanese production houses. Perhaps I could say that I've loved animation all my life.
How did you start seeing the role you can play in different kind of issues in society?
Mm-hmm. Animation is a medium, like any other medium. So you can tell sad stories, happy stories, light stories, serious stories. Back in 2007, 2008, we had an election in Kenya, which was very contentious and which resulted in the loss of a lot of life. And I think I was deeply affected by it. We were living in Nakuru at the time, newlyweds with my wife, and she was working at the General Hospital in Nakuru. So many of the victims from the Rift Valley were passing through that hospital. I'd say through the early part of 2008, I was looking for a story to tell. And I remembered a story that I had read as a child about some animals who pretty much were fairly greedy and oppressed man who was trying to live peacefully with them in the forest. And I remember that story and found out that it is a story that was commonly told round about the independence period. And figured that I could adapt it into a short story to depict what was going on in Kenya at the time.
You've produced something extremely impressive, at least by my standards. And I think it is a world-class called Kura. Tell us about the Kura concept, where you came up with this, when and how you came up with this idea, and why you thought it's important to tell that story.
We as a nation, Kenya, we're about to go into a general election. In fact, it's just a few days away. And unfortunately, the lead up to this election has been very troubling. I think confidence has been shaken in the process. There were problems with the procurement processes. Questions were asked about that. We haven't done as well as we ought, perhaps, with rampant rigging being a constant feature in our elections, violence often accompanying general elections, political assassinations, and general corruption in the whole process. Last year, which would be 2016, I needed to do a project to test some new animation processes. And when thinking through what story I could tell, I stumbled upon a much larger action thriller type of story with an element of the electoral process.
You know, this country is a country that has a huge population of youth. You may be slowly getting out of the category of youth, but you're still a young person. What do you wish? What would you have loved to see, say, around this election? And what do you wish for the future of this country?
As a country, we should be able to choose leaders based on their strength of character and on their performance record. I really pray that we'll get to the place where we have almost professional managers leading our country. I also pray that we'd get beyond, the tribal and parochial mentalities that have perhaps held Kenya back in certain respects. And I'm hoping that more would be done to make sure that the resources which ought to be building this country don't end up wrongly in private pockets through corruption.
Gatume is speaking to me on the eve of Kenya's election on August 8th. And that's our show for today. Now be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com for more news. Tune in to VOA's evening radio show Africa News Tonight at 1800 UTC and in the mornings to Daybreak Africa between 0300 and 0600 UTC Monday through Friday. Thanks a lot for watching from all of us here in Washington. Have a good night.
Welcome to English in a Minute. A cannon used to be a common military weapon.
Loose cannon.
So, are Anna and Jonathan talking about an old battle?
Hey, I'm looking for someone to host a political event tomorrow night. Can your friend Sylvia help out?
Sylvia? She's a loose cannon. You never know what she's going to say. She could easily